Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Someday with Jay Barsky. This episode's guest is comedian and motivational speaker Andrew Tarvin. Andrew Tarvin has a company called Humor That Works that helps create a positive work culture, increase productivity, and reduce stress using humor. He also has a TED Talk titled The Skill of Humor that has over 14 million views on YouTube right now. You'll hear us talk about the services that he offers, his Humor That Works books, and much more. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoy our Sunday with Andrew Tarvin. All right, Drew, what's up? How you doing?
I'm doing great. I can't complain. It is a sunny day here in Panama, so gonna go and you can go for a run probably here in a little bit. I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. It's sunny also where I'm at. I'm in South Florida, so we're both in sunny
Mhm.
areas. I understand you're not in, when you say Panama, not like Panama City in Florida. You're actually in the country. Is that right?
That is correct. I've learned that if I say Panama City, people assume that I mean Florida. So if I just say Panama and stop there,
Um,
people are like they take a half beat and they're like the country. Yeah. And so my wife and I, as a family, we split time between New York City and Panama, and it is still a little cold in New York, so we're spending a little bit more time in Panama for her work right now. And like I said, enjoying the weather.
Well, so being a stand-up comedian yourself, you've been doing some of the open mics or been performing also in Panama, is that correct?
Yeah, we've been setting up some shows here. So in fact, have a show tomorrow night. That's part of the other reason we're all here. But yeah, trying to do. I mean, the beautiful thing about stand up is that I feel like in most countries, most places in the world, they have it somewhere at some time. And so yeah, we're establishing more of a comedy scene because I'm here a decent amount. Figured might as well do comedy. I do a lot of
Nice.
it when I travel for speaking and other things, but while we're here, might as well have fun and make some Panamanians laugh.
Well, being a comedian myself, one thing I really and just kinda enjoyed just doing comedy. I don't try to really seek out too much showcases to perform at, but
Mhm,
I've always my interest in doing comedy or stand-up specifically is traveling and just checking out different open mics. Like my sister lives in Denver, so I'm always like looking up open mics that I can like travel and do there. And then like I have a friend in Seattle and other places, so I'm like always just I just want to look at mics so I can get like a
mhm,
good reel of me being at this location and this location, and I can
mhm.
knock out a few mics in different locations and sightsee. Like you have a cool like tour that way if you do stand up, which is actually a real like fun thing to do for me to do stand up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a fun way to see different places. It's a fun way to kind of get to know some of the things that's going on. Like you go to a stand-up show, you start to get a sense of what are some of the local things that people joke about, especially traveling internationally. I've experienced that as well as you hear some of the comedians, making jokes about things in that international place. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's a thing or that's a place that people reference that people go
Yeah.
to. So I think stand up in a whole is sometimes a mirror of our culture or of our society at a
Mm.
given time. And so I think that's a great way to experience it.
Speaking of your career as a stand up, like I kind of want to talk to other things, which is why like I'm really interested in having you on this program, is because you have two interesting kind of careers that are collided together, which is something that I'm interested
Mhm,
in exploring myself. Is that how you are, being a comedian and also a public speaker and doing a lot of
mhm.
motivational speaking talks. So how'd you kind of get into those two careers or one into the other? Can you just talk a little bit about your journey into that?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe to understand where comedy and speaking kind of collide, it's helpful to start even further back in that my degree is in computer science and engineering from the Ohio State University. And so I have always been a problem solver, engineering mindset person. Like growing up, I was obsessed with efficiency. Like, what's the most efficient way to load the dishwasher? What's the most efficient route to walk to school? Or what's the most kind of efficient way to get good grades where I realized, like, my goal was 93% in my classes, right? Not 100%. 100% meant I did more work than I had to do. 93% was like, okay, I did just enough to get that A and then I could relax the rest of the time. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, get a degree in computer science and engineering, always thinking kind of more, always good with computers, not as good with people. And so at Ohio State, though, I started doing improv and stand up comedy because my best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people, forced me to join. And I was terrible at first, but I learned that one, it was a lot of fun getting on stage. Two, that there was like a science to humor. There's definitely an art component of it
Yeah.
that you can't necessarily teach, but there's a science component that you can learn. And so I started to pick up on those techniques and really enjoyed it. And what I noticed is as I was doing more more improv and stand up, I was actually better as a project manager and computer science engineer. Like after I graduated, I was working at Procter and Gamble as an IT project manager, and so I was doing stand up and improv on the side. But those same techniques were helping me to give better corporate presentations, helping me manage the stress of day to day life, helping me to communicate really boring kind of material in a more interesting way. And so I started to explore that intersection of humor in the workplace, improv in business, happiness and productivity. And so the motivational speaking kind of came out because to me, it's kind of like stand up with a message. I can tell the jokes and the stories like I would in stand up. And then the engineer part of me can also come out and be like, and here's how you can be more effective. And here's how you can do that job a little bit better. So speaking was kind of this natural extension of stand up, but being able to tell people what to do instead of just making them laugh.
I appreciate my experience in doing stand up. It's really definitely affects me in making me become a better speaker in general. So like I've been uh, next month would be 3 years for me in doing stand up. But I've just noticed a lot. I speak more clearly. I'm more comfortable when I'm talking, just because, like, with stand up, you're practicing a lot of your words, especially words that you're not used to saying, or just kind of like, like having more of a scientific view on things, and just you're
Mhm.
experimenting on different wordings, these jokes, sampling different rooms, just testing out certain stuff, and it just makes me more comfortable in just speaking and like go on tangents when I talk, just from all that from my experience in doing stand up. And I've heard you mention this before about being introverted. I would consider myself a big introvert. Like I just love staying home and just reading and stuff like that. But it's definitely pushed me out to get out of my comfort zone and overcoming my fears of like public speaking, and to the point where it's really, not contagious, but, addictive, like, not only just doing stand-up, but just public speaking. Like, it doesn't even have to be, like, making people laugh, even though that's kicking up a notch, but just, like, going to different public speaking events, that actually gets addictive, and it's very therapeutic too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, there's a couple of things that you talked about there. One, I think stand-up comedy is one of the hardest forms of public speaking you'll ever do. I mean, I think probably like educating high schoolers, like being a high school teacher, maybe like even harder than that. But like aside from that, at least for me, it'd be much maybe harder. But stand-up comedy, really, really hard. The expectations of being funny are really, really high. The bar for what people will laugh at is much higher than kind of day-to-day life. When you're doing it, you're sometimes, it's in front of an audience of 200 people, but actually much harder than that is doing stand-up comedy in front of 4 people, like in a basement in one of the New York clubs, etc. So it's like it's almost like the weight room of speaking, to the
Yeah.
point like I've taken a number of like professional keynote speakers to do their first stand-up show, and these are people who have like, done events in front of 2,000 people, 5,000 people, etc. They don't get nervous at all. And then they come and do one kind of open mic or a stand up show with me and they're like freaking out a little bit, right? Because it's
Mm.
so hard. The expectations are so hard. But it is in some ways a safe space to get that practice, right? And that's what improv and stand up did for me. As an introvert, people are sometimes surprised, like, why would you do improv or stand up? But it was this safe kind of environment where it's like there's a clear cut kind of parameters of like I'm up on stage, I have a microphone, it's my turn, I get to talk for like 5 minutes and people aren't going to interrupt for the most part, etc. That made it more accessible. And by getting those practice and repetition of trying those things, exactly like you said, it helped me to get more comfortable then doing it in everyday conversation, in being able to go to a networking event and talk to people and not, completely word vomit out of my mouth, or to be able to do a podcast and adjust and react kind of in the moment, et cetera. And so for sure, it's been a huge kind of boost to me in terms of how it's transformed my life. And that's a big reason why I'm passionate about talking about it from the motivational speaking side of things, is just I know the impact that it's had in my life. And so I want to try to help other people experience maybe that same thing.
So you were working a corporate job while you were doing comedy. So at what point did you kind of just ended your corporate career to kind of start, doing like your current career?
Yeah, well, I kind of wish I had a sexy story about that, like that I was in one of those, project management meetings and someone said something so stupid that I like flipped over the table and walked out and was like, I'm going to be a comedian. I'm too much of an engineer for that to have happened. So instead, it was an evolution. Like I got interested in this idea of humor in the workplace. So it started first as an internal blog at Procter and Gamble. So I just like proclaimed myself the corporate humorist of P&G and started blogging about it. I got like business cards made, and I kind of assumed someone would stop me, right? Like someone from HR or legal would
Hmm.
come up and be like, "Hey, you can't just create your own job title." But no one ever did, right? People started referring to me as a corporate humorist. And so as I did that internally at P&G, I fell in love with that work because it was this idea of stand up with the message. It was coming up with jokes and stories that I could tell and then adding a lesson to it, or, an action item of something I could do differently as a result of it. And then I started doing some of that stuff externally, decided way back in 2009, I was like, okay, this I think is what I want to do for my career. And so I created a spreadsheet of all the things that I needed to complete before I'd feel comfortable leaving P&G. And it took me 2.5 years to complete that spreadsheet. But after I did, it was like proof that I could kind of maybe be partially successful at this thing. And so it was the middle of 2012 that I left P&G. So it's been, 12 years full time of, speaking and training and traveling around, working with different organizations, and all the while also doing stand up and improv on the side.
Oh, that's amazing. And you've definitely accomplished a lot of goals and just, both just being a public speaker and comedy. I mean, one thing with your popular TED Talk with the skill of humor, which is now like over 14 million views. And I want to say one of my favorite, I guess a bit that you put into that speaking is the
Mhm.
lions example that like someone was saying that they could never do stand up comedy just because it was so scary, but they actually like tame lions, which is like obviously a
Mhm.
lot worse. Right?
Yeah, but I think people have that perception, right? Yeah. So the context for that story is I was at a speaking event, and one of the other speakers was a guy named Kevin Richardson who lives with lions. Like his job is like lion conservatory, etc. And he's known as the lion whisperer. And there's like viral YouTube videos, etc. of like lions coming up and hugging this dude, etc. And like when talking with them, and I told him I did stand up. He's like, I could never do that. It's it's too scary. And I think that's a lot of people's perceptions. It's like, oh, that's the thing that I could never do. Or they have this perception that, you're either born funny or not, right?
Yeah.
You have to be either naturally funny or you're not. But the reality is that humor is a skill. And what we say is that we believe we can help anyone learn to be funnier, right? At my organization, Humor That Works, our whole goal is we work with organizations, individuals on helping them use humor more effectively in their lives. Not so that they become stand up comedians, so some people do, but more so that they can be more effective and have more fun in their work. And anyone can learn to be funny. For the people that are really naturally funny, a lot of times what we help them understand is why they're so funny. Because some people are like, yeah, I get people to laugh. I'm just not entirely sure why. And so what we help them understand is what makes people laugh, how they're getting people to laugh so that they can be more intentional about it, so that they can effectively use it to diffuse tension, or so that they could use it appropriately in the workplace, or so that they could use
Mm.
it in a presentation without offending people, et cetera. And so It's very much this kind of part of our big mission is, yeah, teaching people that humor is a skill learned.
You have the book also like titled Humor That Works. So what inspired you to write
Mhm.
that book?
The book came from the broader mission of Humor That Works is, I was what I would say gently pushed into doing improv and stand up, right? My best friend wanted to start this group. He needed people. I found out later that, part of the reason why he wanted me to join wasn't because he thought I was secretly really funny. It's because he knew I was organized,
Mm,
right? Like he knew that if I was in the group, then we were going to have business meetings, that we're going to meet 3 times a week, that I would, I filmed every single show that we did so that we could go back and watch it and try to see what we could learn. I was reading books about comedy, etc. And so he knew I was going to bring kind of the engineering mindset to it. But that act of kind of, encouraged me to do this changed my life, right? It gave me a much better perspective on the things that happened to me. It brought me into like a yes and mindset from the world of improvisation to be more positive, or to see a situation happen to me and try to find, okay, what's funny about that, as opposed to like what's terrible or awful about that thing, or how can I make things a little bit lighter in some ways. It gave me a lot more confidence, both in terms of, certainly in terms of public speaking and in talking to people, but it also
mhm.
just gave me more confidence in who I was as a person, right? As my own ideas. Like the fact that I can get on stage and say things that like I just came up with, like I was just thinking about that. That's interesting. And it makes people laugh. And in some ways helps me feel like those ideas are a little bit more valid, at least when I was first starting out. So it gave me more confidence. And then like I said before, it was helping me a lot at P&G. It was getting me better results. I was getting promoted because of some of this intersection of technical skills and social skills that I had. And so I saw all the positive benefits of using more humor happen in my life. And so the mission of Humor That Works is really to be that gentle push for other people, to be that one that can kind of say, okay, maybe for whatever reason you haven't been using humor in your work because you want to be seen as being taken seriously, or because you don't think that you're funny, or because you're worried about offending people, or whatever it is. We want to gently push people into using humor more in the right way, right? Making sure that's appropriate humor, but so that they too can also get those benefits. And so the book itself, people will sometimes ask, like, how long did it take to write? Because it came out in 2019. And in some ways, it took like 9 months to write, kind of from start to finish, of actually sitting down
Mhm.
and writing it. And in other ways, it took 10 years to write, because it's kind of the culmination, at least at the time, it was the culmination of everything that we had learned and understood from working with, more than 500 different organizations on the value of humor. We wanted to say, okay, this is a business book on humor. This is for the people who are a professional, that they want to understand the what, why, and how of using humor in the workplace more effectively. That's the goal of the book.
And you have a couple of books. It may be, I don't know if we're talking about the same book, but I understand there's a playbook. I don't know if that's the same book
Mhm.
or is it in addition to that book?
Yeah, so that one's different. So we've got three kind of within the humor kind of in the workplace category. The first book that we wrote was called 501 Ways to Use Humor in the Workplace. And so that one's basically just a list of 500 ways to use humor, categorized by different ways of working. And so the idea of it was, after we would do some of these speaking events, people would be like, okay, well, how do I get started? So we were like, well, if we just give you a bunch of ways to get started, you can pick one, right? And so if you're like, I want to add humor to my next email, all right, you go to the section on email and then you pick one of the 13 different ways there. If you're like, oh, I want to use humor in a meeting, okay, you go to that section on humor in a meeting. So that was the first book that we wrote. The second book was the book called Humor That Works. That was meant to be more explain the kind of the what and the why of using humor. Why is this a valuable skill? Why should this be taught in business schools? Why is this something that is in today's environment a must have, as opposed to kind of like a nice to have? And then the last book, the most recent book, is called The Skill of Humor Playbook. And this is a much deeper dive into the how. Because as we continue to explore this idea that humor is a skill, we started to realize that if it is a skill and it means that it can be learned, then the question isn't, are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you? Right? Because the way that I'm funny is very different than the way that you might be funny. And part of what helped me realize this is that my brother and I were presenting at the same event. And my brother does speak a little bit about humor based on some of the work that I've done and we've done together. He's a professor of communications and influence and rhetoric. And so he started to talk about like humor, how humor applies that. But we spoke at the same event at an event in Morocco. And after the event, we're waiting for the elevator to come, and a woman comes up to us and she's like, I think, are you two seriously related? It's like, yeah. And we don't look a lot alike. Like, I get told that I kind of look like a skinny Hugh Jackman, maybe with the glasses off. Some people kind of see a little skinny Hugh Jackman. My brother is much taller. He gets told that he kind of looks like Jonathan Van Ness from A Queer Eye, or he gets told sometimes he'll get like old Fabio, kind of like whatever.
Oh,
He has
okay.
super long hair, etc. So we don't look anything alike. So she's like, partially you don't look alike. And then she was like, the main reason why I wanted to know if you were related, she's like, your sense of humor is so different. She turned to my brother and she was like, your humor is very like warm, right? And then she turned to me and she's like, and your humor is more cold. And I think what she was kind of referencing is that my brother is that quote unquote naturally funny person. Like,
Okay.
before we started working and dissecting it, he didn't know why he was funny. He just knew that he made people laugh. It's
Mhm.
very conversational, very kind of friendly, very, very impromptu in many ways. Whereas my humor is very kind of set up and punchline. Like, if I make people laugh, it's most likely because I like thought of it beforehand and structured. Like,
Yeah.
I'm that engineer, right? I'm not the naturally charismatic person. So I needed to do this. And so that conversation, though, led us to try to understand, okay, why is there distinction? Is one funnier than the other? I don't think so. And so as we started to do more and more research on this, we discovered that there are 7 primary personas of how people tend to express their humor in the workplace. And so the idea behind these personas isn't that you're stuck with one, right? It's not that, you're always only an entertainer. Like, my brother is very much an entertainer persona, like that person who is very good up in front of other people. But that you might use different personas at different times for different goals. So you might be an entertainer when you're ever presenting in front of people, but with your friends over text message, you might be what we call a humor curator. And
Mm.
that's someone who's really good at taking something that like makes them laugh or smile. Like, say they see a funny video online or a meme or something, and then they send it to their friends who they know is going to like it. Like, oh, hey, my
Mm.
other good friend really loves cat videos or whatever, so I'm going to send them this cat video. So that's a humor curator, right? And so these different personas show up at different times, and the Skill of Humor playbook, in addition to the quiz that we have on our website, is really about helping people unlock each one of these personas, understand what they are, when they might be valuable, and and some exercise on how to actually get started using them. So, if Humor That Works is about kind of the what and why and an introduction to the how, this playbook is very much like a workbook style book to kind of say, okay, here's how you actually build that skill.
Mm. Well, you mentioned the humor persona quiz, so do you wanna discuss a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So on our website, I think there's a natural kind of inclination of like, okay, these personas, again, which one am I? Right? Which of the 7? Because there are 7. You can be an enthusiast. This is someone who like appreciates the joys of everyday laughter, someone who's quick to laugh at something, can find the humor in a situation. You have the curator, as mentioned. This is someone who, like, when they find something funny, they share it with other people as well. You have an inventor. These are the writers of kind of humor, the people that can think about setup and punchline, and they know what like a comic triple is or a callback, right? So stand-up comedians
Yeah,
need to, when they're
okay.
writing, they're like kind of that inventor persona. You have the entertainer. This is when you're up in front of people. So this might be improvisers, or when you're doing stand-up, the actual performance component of it falls into entertainer. You have the humor engineer. That is someone who is like really strategic about using humor to solve problems. So this is what we do at Humor That Works. The company is the
Mm.
idea of like, okay, you're dealing with employee engagement. Well, how could humor help with that? Or if you need to better work on stress management, here's how humor can help. You have the humor advocate, and this is someone who is very much about supporting other people's humor, putting them in a position to succeed. And then finally, you have the humor skeptic. This is someone who is very careful of the consequences and consideration of humor, because we do recognize, particularly say humor in a workplace, the same humor that you see in a stand-up comedy club is not going to be the same humor that works well when you're giving a presentation at 9 a.m. to your entire, CEO and review board, et cetera, right? So the skeptic is able to balance that a little bit more. And so the quiz itself, free 2-minute quiz that anyone can take on our website, is to just say, okay, which one of these personas is your primary persona? Because you can absolutely learn all 7, and that's what we encourage people to do. What we train them on how to do is to learn how to use all 7 and become this whole humorist that's able to use the different personas when needed. But there is probably one that you do a little bit more often or more naturally than the others. And so when you're first starting to learn or use the skill of humor a little bit more, what we encourage is for people to lean into that primary persona first, start to find ways to be more deliberate about that one, and then learn the other ones as you go. And the quiz is meant to help you identify which one it is.
Hmm. I'll check it out. I mean, when you were describing it, I was like, oh, maybe I would consider myself an inventor, like just trying to write jokes. And
Mhm.
I'm always like, if I'm either at an open mic or a show, and if I'm going up, I'm always like listening closely for a callback or something just to describe what was
Mhm.
going on previously. I like will start trying to think of a joke quick right away for or something like that, which sometimes it works.
Exactly, and yeah, and sometimes it doesn't. I think inventors recognize that, like, it's not always gonna work, but for sure, and that's the thing, though, is, like, you're probably an inventor when you're writing, but when you step onto the stage, you might then be the the entertainer. Or in this podcast, in some ways, you're an advocate. You're bringing on people that you want to talk to and showcase and asking them questions. So that's kind of what an advocate does, right? And so that's part of the goal, is the recognition that, yeah, many of us can and probably should be, more than one. And as I was describing them, there's probably people that were listening. It's like, oh, when I'm with my friends, I'm a curator, but when I'm like at home or when I'm in the workplace, I might be more of a skeptic and I don't actually use it more. And it's like that's completely natural. The goal is to be more intentional about when you're using which one.
No, that's great. And just kind of going back on the humor that works business, and you were talking a lot about like services that it offers.
Mhm.
But like I would like to ask for more details on like there's other stuff I saw that you kind of offer through the humor that works business is like you offer a course, I understand, and probably like I saw
Mhm.
something like a community or like a plan in order for people to get involved.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so our goal, like I said, with Humor That Works is to, one, elevate the status of humor, elevate it so that people recognize that this should be a valuable skill in the workplace, not a nice to have or even kind of a frivolous thing to have, but that it should be looked for and even interviewed for, et cetera, encouraged in the workplace. And so to that end, we wanted to provide different ways for people to learn it, because people learn it completely free resources. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to do the TEDx talk on the skill of humor, is a great way to share this value of humor, get it out to a lot more people. We have a bunch of free resources on the website, like blog posts and articles, etc., on how to start to use humor in the workplace. The next tier from that is we have the books, right? So the idea is you can buy the Humor That Works book or the Skill of Humor playbook to start practicing the skill. We recently just launched our essential series, our essential course series. And so, if you're really interested just in your one persona, so if you're like, oh, I'm an inventor and I want to learn more about how to be a better humor inventor and what that means, how to go, we have just an individual course you can take. Or if you're like, hey, I want to learn all of the personas and what it takes to kind of use them effectively, then we have the course series, the whole kind of essentials course package. And then from there, we have some one-on-one coaching that we do. We do a lot of workshops for organizations and for companies, kind of bringing us in for workshops and things like that. And then the thing that I do the most is probably keynote speaking. So
Mhm.
on the bigger stages at conferences and offsites, et cetera, kind of introducing this concept in a really fun, really engaging kind of presentation or keynote setting where we're making people laugh, we're making them think, we're getting them to interact, and then also teaching them a couple techniques for using humor in the workplace a little bit more. So all of those things are kind of in service of helping people use humor a little bit more. Connected to many of those is also the Humor That Works community. So the goal is to create, an opportunity or a place for people to be able to practice humor or to ask questions about it, because that is, humor is an interesting skill in the sense that it is one of the skill, like it's like communication in the sense that you kind of have to practice it with other people. Like if you want to get better at the piano, you can sit and play the piano by yourself for a really long time. And then maybe eventually you do a concert, but you know whether something is working or not working for the most part if you're playing the piano. You know when you make a mistake or when something is messed up, etc.
Mhm.
Humor, like you don't really know something is funny until you say it to someone else and you see if they laugh or not.
Mhm.
And so the Humor That Works community is meant to be a safe space for people to practice this skill of humor so that, if you're a little bit nervous or new to it, that you don't necessarily have to try this humor thing for the very first time in front of, if you're giving a pitch deck because you're an entrepreneur and selling something, you don't necessarily want the first time you're using a piece of humor in front of a bunch
Mhm.
of investors, but that you've had a chance to get some feedback from, other like-minded people or from some of our humor coaches, etc. So
Okay.
yeah, we've got a whole range, like I said, with the whole goal of helping people to use humor.
Oh, that's great. I kind of want to go back to you were mentioning previously about like the books that you've written, but another book that wasn't mentioned that I'm curious, and I think it was one of the first that I saw that came out from you, was The United States of Laughter. So was that more focused on your experience in stand up?
Yeah, that one's a little bit more of a travel memoir. So
Okay.
I found in a few years ago, I was traveling pre-pandemic. I was traveling quite a bit and living in New York City, and rent in New York City is very high, and so I was like gone so much. I was like, why am I paying rent for a place that I'm hardly in? And
Mm.
so I decided to put my stuff in storage and live out of two carry-on bags, and ended up being a nomad for 18 months. Like I didn't know how
Oh,
long it was
wow.
going to last, but I was just traveling from event to event, doing stand up, etc. And as part of that, as an engineer, I was like, oh, I should try to get to all 50 states. I want to speaker perform in all 50 states. And so I ended up doing that in a year, in a 12-month time period. And so the United States of Laughter is kind of that travel memoir of that experience. So it's
Oh,
told
wow.
through a story from each state that I went to. What's one meaningful thing that happened to me, or one experience that I had. So it's life lessons. There's a little bit about kind of using humor, etc. But there's also me, more reconciling the passing of my father many years ago, to me reflecting on my greatest experience in North Dakota, which was eating an amazing donut. Right. So it's a whole range of things. It's much more of kind of like a personal style of things.
What was so great about the donut?
It was a s'mores donut, and it
Mm.
was delicious. I think part of the context of it was like, as I was going through these states, I was trying to be on the lookout for like, what are these positive experiences, and nothing against North Dakota. Just my experience of it was driving very flat roads with absolutely nothing to see for the longest time. Like
Mm.
North Dakota is, I think, home to like three out of the four longest straight roads in the world, in the terms of like how long it is of going, and there's absolutely no turn whatsoever. And there's very little that's going on in a lot of different places. And so we finally got to Fargo, North Dakota, and I was doing a speaking event there. And I don't know, there's something about, we went to a place called Sandy's Donut, and
Mm.
I got a s'mores donut, and it's still the best donut that I've ever had. And so it's just a little bit of that reflection and perspective and all that kind of stuff. And next time I'm back anywhere close to Fargo, I will for sure be going back.
I got a weakness for Boston cream. Like I don't even want to get near Boston cream because I know I'll just eat it like Homer Simpson, dude.
Yeah.
Something I like to ask my guests on here is just like any special routines, rituals that they follow throughout their day or their week to help them prepare for anything.
Sure. I mean, I think a big one from, I would say, the kind of the humor side of things is, I do keep a humor notebook. And so at the end of each day and kind of throughout the day, I try to capture ideas, thoughts, stories, etc., things that happen to me, to be able to potentially use later. So it's just kind of like, oh, this was an interesting thought or idea that I've had, or this crazy thing happened to me at the store or whatever. So I'll capture that in the humor notebook. And then, not quite weekly, but when I'm prepping for shows or I'm writing a new newsletter or something else, I oftentimes will go back to the notebook and be like, hey, what happened over the course of the past couple of days? And what research has found, like the reason why I do it, is because the act of writing the humor notebook, one, like, helps you remember all the things that happened to you, all the funny stuff or all the interesting ideas to continue to explore, etc. So it improves my memory, because I have a terrible memory. So it helps me to actually kind of like keep track of things. But more so is that I recognize when I'm writing stand up, or when I'm writing, pretty consistently in the note, being on the lookout for it, even subconsciously, helps me like recognize it a little bit more. And this is where we've kind of seen or found that, it's not that funny things happen to funny people, it's that funny people see the things that happen to them in a funny way.
Hmm.
And so the humor notebook is a great ritual to kind of like just keeping track more of the amount of time that you're laughing, and finding joy and the interesting things that you find, etc. So that's one related to humor that I think is really important. And then a simple one, just from a family thing, is my goal is to try. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. My goal is to try to make her laugh really hard at least once each day.
Hmm.
And my puns and my actual scripted material very rarely work on her. but she loves a good game of hide and seek or peekaboo or, the hokey pokey, etc. So doing those things is another fun ritual.
And that's great. It's just a good feeling to have, even if you made one person laugh, like in your day.
Hmm.
Like even when I'm at like open mics or like when I'm just working out new material, like even if the open mic has like one or two people in it, I'm fine like with it. I know it's like a lot of
Hmm.
comics are like, oh, I want to do this. I was like, no, I still would go as one, it gives me like time to actually work out the new material that I'm trying to work out verbally. So even
Hmm.
if no one was there, as long as I have a mic in my hand, but the fact that even if
Yep.
there's like at least one person that I'm making laugh there, then that I'm cool with it. I leave
Hmm.
a happier person.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there's something about creativity too. And I can't remember, I wish I could remember who said it or talked about it, was this act of creation isn't even always about the end product. Like whether it is sitting down and writing for this, whether it's going to an open mic and performing, or something in your own creative field of like painting or other things, is that the act of creating is this practice. And there's tremendous value in getting the practice, even if the end result isn't the perfect or beautiful thing that you want. What you're doing is you're giving yourself the skill set so when it does come up for real, you're ready for it. When you do get hit or inspired by a certain idea, that you can execute on it. Like the success, I think, of the TEDx talk is largely driven by the number of reps that I did prior to it.
Mm,
That I wasn't all that nervous before the TEDx talk because at that point I had already done, nearly 1,000 stand-up shows because I had done a number of run-throughs of it, that I had like
right.
given myself this skill set. Because like if it even if I had the exact same script, if it was gifted to me or whatever, to deliver right before going on stage, if it wasn't the reps beforehand, I wouldn't have had the skill set to do it justice. And same thing, I recently shot a dry bar comedy special, and it's that same thing where it's like, all right, yeah, it's not what did I do that for that warm up, the 30 minutes before that got me into it, that dictates my success or not. No, it's like what work did I put in prior to it. And
Right.
so I think those, like you said, those reps of, even if it's just making one person laugh, or even if no one laughs, but you force yourself to do it when it was in front of two people, those reps stack up and,
Mhm.
pay off later in life or down the road with that particular skill.
Right. Do you have any practices that help motivate you that you may recommend for our listeners?
Sure. So, I think the humor notebook is also somewhat motivating to kind of like try to fill it out. I think so that kind of works. Exercise is a big thing. I remember reading Seinfeld talked about, especially in preparation for things like speaking. Seinfeld talked about, you should know your material so well that someone could be slapping you in the face and you would
Mm,
still be able to get the material out.
mm.
I never kind of like signed up for like, I don't want people to just slap me in the face to test that theory. So instead, what I do is like, I go for a run. Like if I'm
Mm,
working on something that I'm like a presentation or something that I'll go for a run because that's like a slight cognitive task of figuring out where I'm going to go. But it also, and it like is a physical exertion, but it also allows me to focus and not be distracted on my phone or anything like that. So I do think exercise can be really valuable, particularly can use it even more strategically to prep for, say, things like events or to force yourself to think through things.
yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Are
Mhm.
you Drew, are you working on anything that our listeners should watch out for?
Sure, I would say the big thing that we're working on right now continues to be the humor persona content. So we continue to kind of add to it, build towards it. So taking the humor persona quiz and getting access to some of that is a big focus of ours because we do think it helps position. It's one of the easiest ways to get into using humor more in your life is starting with what you're more naturally good at. So it's a big focus. And then I'd say the other one is we've recently started a Substack slash newsletter called The Funny Thing About That. And the idea is a growth mindset or even becoming a parent or dating or other things, just kind of like humor angle to an excuse to kind of talk about some interesting topics and subject matter. And seen a lot of success and a lot of great reactions to that as well. We started a great post recently that was essentially asking people what's the story of their name, which is a great icebreaker question. What's the story of your name? But got people a lot engaged and stuff, and so it helped us to kind of frame a conversation of what names mean, etc. So a lot of fun that we're really doing that drops every single Friday. So it's a great thing for people to check out, which they can learn more about at funnythingaboutthat.com. everything else in terms of the resources and stuff that we have, you can see at humorthatworks.com.
Awesome. I'll definitely take some time to check up on that. I am trying to develop more my humor in the professional setting as well. Can't always use
Mhm.
my club comedy jokes into, the
Yep.
corporate world.
Yeah.
Uh,
Very true.
and that dry bar, like I'll definitely look forward to that. That should be awesome
Yeah.
to see.
It'll still be a few months before it comes out, I think, just based on their kind of like lineup or queue. But it was a lot of fun to shoot, and really excited for people to be able to check it out.
Awesome, awesome. So, Drew, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with our listeners?
Sure. I mean, the final thought I would share is maybe two things kind of back to is first, when people ask kind of this question of like why humor in workplace, why is it actually valuable, etc. I think there's a couple of things. There's no reason why we talk about it. The first is certainly that it does help you to do your work better. We talk about 30 plus benefits of using humor in the workplace backed by research, case studies, real world examples that people can kind of check out. So there is tremendous benefit to helping people, do their work better. Two, it does help you to connect a little bit closer, right? It helps you to connect on a deeper level because humor is very much a human thing. And so if you want to really get to know someone, part of their sense of humor is part of getting to know them. But the biggest thing that we would say is, even if humor didn't have 30 plus benefits to using it, even if it didn't make you more productive, less stressed, etc., if it only made you enjoy your work a little bit more, if it only made you a little bit happier each day, like wouldn't that alone be enough to like justify
Hmm.
the time to actually investigate it, learn how to do a little bit better? And we think yes. And the reality is that the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime, right? Like 90,000 hours. That is a tremendous amount of time. And so we say that is way too much time to kind of get through the day, to like live for the weekend, etc. And so we think that, you choose every single day how you do your work, maybe not the individual components of it, but how you approach it. And so we suggest and encourage, like, why not choose to be more productive, less stressed, and happier? Why not choose to get better results, have more fun? Why not choose humor that works?
No, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. But definitely appreciate this. I'm glad to have you on the program. I've been just a big follower of your work for the longest time and just admire everything you did and you've accomplished. And I definitely look forward to that dry bar special because I'm always keeping an eye out for like different dry bar comedy. We'll definitely watch out for it. But thank you so much, Drew. And thank you for joining me on Someday with Jay Barsky.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to our episode with Andrew Tarvin. Follow him on all his socials, which you may find in the episode notes. I hope you enjoyed our episode. Please rate and comment on the podcast to help make it grow. If you wish to follow me, all my socials are at I am Jay Barsky. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.